Do you believe the Growth Management Act is effective? And what would you do to improve its workability?
The Growth Management Act is 20 years old, and just by way of example, I was a planning commissioner down in Cowlitz County, which is down out of Longview. We were one of 3 counties in the state, 4 counties, pardon me, that didn't have the GMA. So we were running the way things were in the past. Now the GMA has a lot of good attributes to it, but again, it's 20 years old, and the concept, although it looks good on paper, the reality of it is we need to look at that again. We need to pick up that document, address the issues that work, and address the issues that don't work. And this is something that has to be done at the legislative level. You know, the committee that looks over the current laws on that, they've set some precedent out there which have been, well, they haven't worked. It's that simple. So there's nothing wrong with that. It was a great document at its time with a lot of great ideas. It just hasn't worked all that great in some certain areas. Not everybody can live in the city, and certainly not in North Mason County, not everybody can live in this city. So let's address that again. Let's pick that document up, look it over a little bit, and see what needs to be revamped on that.
Okay. Linda Ring Erickson, same question.
The Growth Management Act was a bipartisan bill, and in reality, I don't think it has ever fulfilled the legislative intent. I was actually working for a different county when it was passed, and the legislative intent talked about how it would allow local governments to kind of pick their footprint. Kitsap County and Thurston County were of a size that they were originally in the bill, and Mason County opted in, again with bipartisan leadership, thinking that at that time, since we had no zoning at all, that it would help assist us moving towards the future and actually become more attractive to business. There are a couple areas that I know have been attempted to be revisited a number of times, and I would be part of the group that I hope would do that. I think 20 years is a good time to review the progress and maybe look at the entire document. But the Growth Management Hearings Board was intended to be a review to see if the intent of the local plan was being implemented. In fact, it's become something quite different, and I think that many counties, cities too, have spent millions of dollars appealing decisions that didn't really work for their community and actually were working contrary to the community. And frankly, Mason County is one of those counties. I know Thurston County has suffered similar issues with water adequacy, so we really need to look at that. The other piece has to do with anybody can file a case in growth management. Everybody has standing, so they don't have to live in the county, they don't have to own property in the county, and they don't have to have any vested interest. And I think we need to revisit that as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McEwen.
Well, we got a lot of regulations, don't we? Shoreline management, sewer, growth management, and it is old. And I think there's 2 inherent flaws in it. One, there's 14 points to the Growth Management Act with none of those 14 points having more weight than the other. You can go before a review board and think you've met maybe 10 out of 14, but they think those other 4 were more important than the 10 you did meet, and you lose. I think that's wrong. We need to define where the priorities are, what's most important, so that developers can plan and we can have affordable housing. Mason County has 60% roughly of Mason County is water. We got enough restrictions when it comes to building. The other key factor for the Growth Management Act is local control, which I believe that whether it's the school district or growth management, we know best what's for our communities, don't we? And I don't think it's fair that we have review boards that aren't necessarily comprised of the people in the communities they live in, and that needs to change. Whether those people are elected or appointed at the local level, that's a discussion we can certainly have, but I think we need to have local review when it comes to growth management hearings.
Thank you. Mr. Gaither.
It's a long walk around if you're running for state rep. If you're a congressman, you're right up here on the easy end. So the Growth Management Act, which started out in 1990, had like 13 objectives, right? So part of that was supposed to be public spaces. Some of it was supposed to be environmental, economic. They're looking at recreation, building permits, and a host of other things. And when they wrote this thing, their objective was that every one of these things was going to be equal all the way across the top. But what I think has happened in the past 20 years is it's gotten a bit out of balance. Instead of having all these things on a level playing field, economics down here in the bottom, and environmentalism's up here on the top. Now, everybody in this room, and myself included, is all for clean air and water. But it has to be a balanced and managed act. So my recommendation would be to have a complete audit of GMA done by the state auditor's office to see where it's really working and where it's not working, and to see whether or not it's even cost effective. And I can see he's getting ready to hold up the 30-second time. There, 30 seconds, great. So anyways, I'd like to thank all the Navy guys in here, because without those guys, Marine Corps couldn't get to the job site. So again, my name's Glenn Gaither.
Stay right there, because you get the next question.
Almost made it all the way around.
You don't have to take that long walk. We'll save you a little bit there.
Eichner. I could switch signs with McEwen, and no one could tell the difference. My head's shinier.
Hey, buddy. Okay, shocked I am that this question would come up at this forum. What will you do to help bypass the reality?
Ooh, the infamous Belfair bypass question. This thing's been a topic of discussion since 1965. So we've spent 50 years, tens of millions of dollars doing different studies, environmental impact studies, and looking at this thing in 1,000 different ways. You know, right now, I believe they're working on actually widening the roads in Belfair, making the flow of congestion smoother through town, and that's a real good and feasible plan. But we're in a position right now in the state where revenues are way down, and fuel or revenues from gasoline or our transportation revenues are also down. The reason is because they pushed and pushed and pushed to put people in more fuel-efficient vehicles, right? So now we're buying fewer gallons of gas. Those revenues have dropped. So we have to come up with a different means of providing those revenues. The best way to do that is to work on strengthening our economy. We had a budget surplus, and the reason we had that budget surplus because everybody was working. Everybody was doing well. The revenues were there. Okay? Now what we're doing is we're trying to create newer taxes, more taxes, newer and increased fees, and that's not really going to work for us because it's going to choke out the economy.
And we've had a request from audiovisual. If we can keep our animal pacing within, what about right here? Like that? How's that? Okay, Ace, thank you. Just follow the marks.
We'll get you a wide lens next time. So where were we? Belfair bypass. Yeah, I remember moving out here in 1994 and hearing about this Belfair bypass thing, and didn't understand what it was about until one weekend a bunch of Navy guys and I decided to go to the state park down on 106, and we found out why we need a Belfair bypass on a Friday afternoon. It is important, and it's been studied to death, and it takes leadership. We've spent enough money studying it. It's time to do it. And the leadership to do it, we've had a failure to govern in this state, plain and simple. When we've had 6 special sessions in the last 2 years, you think the Belfair bypass is anywhere on the priority list? So we need to change the culture in Olympia and show some leadership and get this done and move it forward. And we need to bring some of the players at the state level here and let them see what's going on so they understand it. Sending our senator and 2 representatives to talk about it isn't going to get it done. So we need to show some leadership, get other people involved, and make sure the DOT is prioritized.
Well, this is that piece of puzzle that I wanted to talk a little bit more, which is I think that the 35th District particularly has not gotten its fair share of the transportation dollars. I guess you could say for 50 years. I think, frankly, Glenn, it's been going on since about 1950. Maybe it's closer to 100 years. There was a time when we were the top economic driver of the state. We had the highest per capita income in the state. We had the highest number of PhDs in the state. But right now we really can't attract business. We can't attract industry because you can't get the raw materials in, and you can't depend on getting the finished product out. And there's a good chance you can't depend on your employees getting to work on time. The reality is the Belfair bypass is probably the #1 on the list for infrastructure in terms of rural projects. We have not enough money at this point in the state to back all the projects that are on the list. And we have worked hard for the last 7 years to keep this project alive. There will be some funding going in this year to complete the environmental impact statements, and as well as probably enough money to begin the acquisition of property. But there isn't enough money, and we do need to look at new structures and new thoughts about how we're going to fund transportation into the future. The good news is that the funding for the improvements of SR3 through Belfair are fully funded at this time, although I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. Thank you.
Okay, Jeff.
I'll answer this one. For the last 8 years, I've been working on freight mobility throughout the state of Washington, even in the United States, working on train issues, working on rail issues, working on highway issues. Currently, the United States is ranked 22 in the world as far as transportation infrastructure. That's got to change. Here's the fact. Every single one person in this room that goes to the store and buys something has paid for a big tunnel over in King County. All right? That money needs to be here. Let's be honest, it's not just for Mason County, it's not just for Kitsap County, it's for the whole peninsula. There's more of a return on the investment for investing in transportation infrastructure in Mason County, in Kitsap County, than there ever will be for digging a hole over there in King County. It's got to take somebody that's going to go to Olympia and say, this is a priority for the state, not just for the 35th district, but for the 22nd, 24th, all the way up throughout the peninsula. Because if we don't have the transportation infrastructure in place like we need, and we don't have the congestion that we have over here and down in Shelton, no business is going to want to come in here because they're going to look at that and say, how are we going to get a truck through there? Or how are we going to get more people through there that's going to be coming into the area and hopefully enjoying it? I know my way around the halls in Olympia, specifically on transportation issues. And so when I talk about money being taken out of our community and shipped over to King County, know this. I'm going to go to Olympia and say, wait a minute. This is beneficial for the state, and the return on the investment that's going to happen in the 35th district is going to benefit everybody in the state, not just King County.
Okay, so the last question from the audience. What is your position on charter schools?
Well, I got to go back in something I said originally. My mother is a retired school teacher of 36 years. I have 5 school teachers in my immediate family. In my opinion, charter schools imply that our current school system is broken, and I don't believe that it is. There's some things that we need to have addressed in our current school system, but having a charter school isn't, in my mind, the answer. So here's the thing is the way I look at it. Do we pay for somebody to come in and put a school in of which we don't have any control over? All of you have the ability to be a part of a PTA, a Parent-Teacher Association. All of you have the ability to go into that school and say, you know what, I don't like what's happening here. I don't like the way the education is happening. And with a charter school, you've given up that right. So here's the question. Are you going to have your tax dollars go to a charter school to where you have absolutely no control over the way your kids are educated? Or are you going to keep that money in the private sector and say, I can do something about this? And this is what, hopefully, activism within your community is all about. I'm not in favor of charter schools, and I would vote against it.
Linda.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, what is your position on charter schools?
I'm opposed to charter schools. I think that we had the best education system in the world in the mid-50s. At that time, the United States had the best education. We had the best education system in the nation, and our nation's education system was the best one in the world. And we've seen that continuously eroded. And, you know, where somebody wants to send their children to a private school, I think that's a personal family decision. But I think that if we want to be the society that we say we want to be, we need to have exceptional public schools. And one of my commitments going to Olympia will be to work very hard to ensure funding. Many of you are aware there's been a recent state Supreme Court finding, McClary versus the state of Washington. It came out of Federal Way, not the city of McClary. But it had to do with making sure that the schools provided, or that the state provided an ample, stable source of funding for the educational system. I believe that as a legislator, it would be one of my top priorities to work on finding a way to develop a dedicated source of funding so that we can make sure that our education system carries us through into the future. Thank you.
Well, according to the Policy Institute of Washington, 60% of our college freshmen in this state have to take remedial math and English to get up to speed for college-level work. So I submit we got some issues. And to dismiss something out of hand without any discussion of it is irresponsible. So, are there issues with charter schools? There are pros, certainly, to it. It's proven in states that have them. On the other hand, we can't just put a charter school system into place that jeopardizes the local schools. We need to find that balance. And I think we need to have that discussion because it's the responsible thing to do. This isn't a slam on our current teachers. We have wonderful teachers. My kids are in the Shelton Public School. And they've had some tremendous teachers that I have a lot of respect for, that have made a positive impact on my sons' lives. So, but we do have issues that we need to address. We need to have the discussion, and we need to find the solution. And if we can look over to across the water, and there's an aviation high school, it's not a charter school. It's done within the public school system. I kind of look at that as a hybrid. And maybe we need to look at stuff along those lines and find those right solutions. So just to dismiss it out of hand, I think is the wrong track to take. Let's have the discussion, but let's make sure we don't jeopardize our local schools.
I hope those county commissioners have to walk all the way around. So, not that end. Charter schools, yes, no, maybe, who knows? You know, what I like to have as many options out there available for our children as humanly possible. In our house, we homeschool, okay, but there are resources that we use from the state to do that. That way we can have them tested to make sure that they're staying at a certain level. This fall they're going to be going to Mason County Christian School. We chose that. So what I like to see is the parents and the adults out there making the decisions for our children to actually have some options. You know, one thing that a lot of people talk about is funding the child. And they're like, well, what does that mean? You know, on average, this state spends about $10,300 per student per year for K through 12 education. How would it be if instead you got a voucher or a check that year, and you as a citizen and as a parent got to actually pick the school that your child went to? Maybe you don't like a particular school because they're having issues at that school. Maybe you don't like the teachers in that school. Maybe there's other issues, you know, transportation issues, and you want to pick your school for your children. You should have the greatest amount of say in the education that your child gets. There have been independent studies done also where the actual graduation rate in 2008, I believe, was only like 64%. Now they're saying it's somewhere up around 72%, but that's still not a really good graduation rate. When I graduated from high school, which was back in 1979, just a couple of years ago, we graduated 95% of the students in the class and only spent about 15% of the state budget on education.